Hey guys, tonight we step onto the sun-baked shores of Tahiti, where the scent of saltwater mixes with crushed coral and the occasional whiff of tropical fruit you didn't know you were allergic to. You trudge through sand so fine it clings to every exposed patch of skin, and the waves lap lazily, almost tauntingly, as if they know you're about to witness something utterly absurd. You probably won't survive this historical journey without cringing, or at least raising an eyebrow, but don't worry, that's part of the charm. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always fun to imagine the world listening along with us. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive in Tahiti as part of a British crew, boots squeaking against the wooden deck, sunburn already threatening your unprepared shoulders. You notice the islanders observing you from a distance, curious and cautious. Here's the thing, they're not impressed by your rank or your uniform. What grabs their attention is your cargo of nails. Yes, simple iron nails, hardly the stuff of legend, but in this world, they are practically magical. The locals had long depended on shells, wood, and stone for construction and decoration. But a small, sharp piece of iron could transform roofs, tools, and even jewelry. It seems mundane to us, but to the Tahitians, it's a novelty worth trading for. Historians still argue whether this fascination was purely practical or a subtle shift in social dynamics. Did nails make Europeans suddenly important, or were they just another item in a bustling marketplace? The first exchanges are awkward. You stumble over your gestures, unsure whether pointing at a nail and then at yourself signals generosity or demand. Meanwhile, Tahitian women approach with grace, curiosity sparking in their eyes. You notice that their approach isn't just about material gain, they gauge your temperament, your patience, even your sense of humor. One young woman holds out a carved shell, tilting her head expectantly. You hand over a nail, feeling oddly conspicuous as she accepts it with a polite nod. That tiny metal piece has just bridged two worlds, a physical token carrying invisible weight, opening doors to favors, information, and alliances that are as complex as they are fleeting. Amid all this, the sensory world is overwhelming. Sand clings to your damp skin, the smell of roasting fish drifts from a nearby fire. And the clank of iron nails in your pockets becomes almost musical, a strange percussion accompanying the chatter of the locals. Fringe accounts whisper that some sailors offered scented oil or even peculiar European trinkets to sweeten the deal, while more skeptical sources suggest these were tall tales meant to spice up otherwise dull voyage logs. Your mind flits between amusement and awe, realizing that what seems like a simple barter is actually a delicate dance, a negotiation of power, curiosity, and survival. And as you walk back toward your landing boat, nails in hand, you can't help but think, in a few hours, this unassuming metal will have altered someone's roof, someone's jewelry. And perhaps, in some tiny ripple, the balance of local social life. The thing about European tools is that their appeal isn't always obvious until you're on the receiving end. In Tahiti, a single iron nail becomes a miniature treasure chest, its value magnified far beyond what you ever imagined in your own familiar surroundings. You watch as locals examine it, fingers tracing the smooth, cool shaft, eyes glinting with a mixture of curiosity, admiration, and anticipation. A nail can fix a thatched roof, repair a canoe, reinforce a hut's frame, or even serve as the central piece in improvised jewelry or ritual objects. You're holding what feels like an ordinary piece of metal, yet here it's imbued with potential, a symbol of power, influence, and practical utility all at once. And yet, it's also completely banal by your own standards, a sliver of steel, simple and unadorned, a reminder that value is never inherent but always context-dependent. Historians still debate whether this fascination with European goods created a lasting reliance among Tahitian communities or was merely a fleeting curiosity, a temporary sparkle in the midst of an otherwise self-sufficient island life. You suspect the truth lies somewhere in between, the appeal was real, but it coexisted with deep traditions of local craft and ingenuity. The barter system is equally fascinating, a fluid dance of exchange and observation. You notice women negotiating among themselves with a deft combination of whispers, nudges, and glances, measuring the worth of your nails against their own offerings. Sometimes it's woven mats, heavy with fiber and scented faintly of pandanus leaves, sometimes coconuts, warm from the sun and fragrant with sweet milk, sometimes favors or services that seem more social than material, gestures of trust and obligation. You try to keep up with the rhythm, but the cadence of these trades feels alien. An almost musical pattern of gesture, expectation, and timing you are only beginning to grasp. Fringe sources suggest some European sailors deliberately exaggerated the value of their tools, hoping to appear indispensable to local communities. Skeptics, however, argue that these stories are embellishments, little more than attempts to make travel logs and memoirs more colorful for London publishers. Regardless of truth or fiction, you can't help but notice the underlying principle. The perceived worth of an object often depends less on its intrinsic properties than on the social and cultural framework into which it is inserted. Meanwhile, your own crew struggles to adapt. Words stumble out clumsily, idioms fail, and polite gestures are misread. Occasionally, they inadvertently offend by offering more nails than necessary or by misjudging the rhythm of the negotiation, creating awkward pauses that hang in the warm, humid air. The locals, with practiced patience, let the mistakes slide, then gently correct, demonstrating lessons in social diplomacy that go far beyond simple commerce. You start noticing subtle cues, the slightest raise of an eyebrow, a sidelong glance, the tilt of a head, a carefully measured pause, all conveying meaning in a language of body, intention, and timing that is almost invisible to an untrained eye. Through it all, the British men seem oddly fascinated, maybe even envious, of the autonomy of Tahitian society, where decisions, relationships, and trade flow naturally and flexibly without the rigid hierarchy and formalities they are accustomed to back home. Even the mundane becomes extraordinary when observed through this lens. Passing a row of thatched huts, you notice nails embedded in wooden door frames, glinting in the sun as if silently proclaiming the influence of foreign metal on local life. Someone jokes, half seriously, about how soon the entire village will be walking around with tiny European spikes in their possessions, and you can't help but chuckle despite your outsider status. The sensory world presses in with constant intensity, the sharp tang of salt air mixing with the sweet rot of vegetation, the warmth of the sun against your skin, the hypnotic rhythm of trade punctuated by laughter, murmurs, and the occasional squawk of a tropical bird. Every step, every glance, every small exchange carries significance. It's bizarre, yes, but also exhilarating. These simple iron rods are not just nails, they are catalysts. They unlock doors to influence, curiosity, and small experiments in negotiation and social maneuvering. They carry potential for repairing, improving, and asserting presence. They embody power that is portable, tangible, and yet subtly contingent on the perceptions of others. In Tahiti, a nail is a tool, a currency, a status marker, and a lesson in perspective all at once. Holding one, you begin to understand that the ordinary can be extraordinary, that the simplest things can ripple outward in ways both practical and profound. And that survival, respect, and even amusement often hinge on recognizing what others cannot take for granted. As you settle into the rhythm of island life, you begin to notice patterns in the Tahitian economy that outsiders rarely record. It is never just a matter of goods for goods, the exchanges carry layers of meaning, shaped by relationships, reputation, and subtle social signaling. Every transaction is a performance, an interplay of observation, intuition, and timing. Women, in particular, wield influence with a finesse that the British men rarely anticipate. They orchestrate trades, sometimes exchanging favors, sometimes sharing information, and occasionally offering nothing tangible at all. Yet the consequences of these interactions ripple across the community, shaping alliances and hierarchies. Walking along a beach where the sun catches shells and stones, turning them into miniature prisms of light, you watch a group of women quietly negotiate the distribution of iron nails. To an untrained eye, it looks mundane, almost casual, but each gesture, pause, and whispered comment is part of a careful choreography of status, strategy, and observation. Historians continue to debate whether these networks were primarily economic or more like intricate social games, where goods merely lubricated the flow of influence, but standing here, you sense that both interpretations hold fragments of truth. Your own attempts at participating are awkward, fumbling, and painfully obvious. You mispronounce words, point at the wrong objects, and misread cues that carry subtle significance. Polite smiles mask amusement, gentle nods conceal judgment, and at times you are unsure if you have succeeded or failed. One local woman slides a small, woven basket toward you, tilting her head slightly to gauge your reaction. You offer a nail in exchange, but she shakes her head just barely. A subtle signal that your contribution falls short of expectation. Around you, trades continue with an almost musical rhythm, laughter punctuates the air, the clink of metal resonates against the sand and stone, and the occasional shout rings out as someone announces a favorable deal. Fringe accounts tell of European sailors who attempted to formalize these trades with contracts, marks on paper, or even tally sticks, only to find that Tahitians' informal agreements, based on observation, mutual respect, and social memory, were far more binding than any inked document. Gradually, you begin to discern the subtle cues that guide every interaction. A flick of the wrist signals acceptance. A deliberate pause conveys hesitation, a sidelong glance marks priority or caution. The British men, conditioned to rigid contracts and formal declarations, struggle to interpret this fluid language, often mistaking a minor gesture for approval or disapproval. Meanwhile, the women coordinate with a collective intelligence, negotiating silently among themselves, adjusting the distribution of goods, and maintaining an unspoken sense of fairness and balance. There is elegance in this process, a fluidity that seems almost instinctive, a quiet intelligence that demands attention and respect. And yet, it carries risk. A missed cue, a misread smile, or a slightly delayed response could leave you on the wrong side of an exchange, empty-handed, and with nothing to show but a sheepish grin and heightened self-awareness. Even the most mundane items are transformed in this context. A coconut is more than sustenance, a woven mat is more than a floor covering, a nail is more than iron. Each object carries layers of weight, practical, social, symbolic. A nail can repair a hut, a canoe, or a tool, yes, but it can also mark your participation in a network. Signal goodwill, or signal status. You begin to perceive the dual life of objects, their tangible utility and their embedded social meaning. Surprisingly, what could have been chaos or confusion is instead structured, almost instinctive, shaped by a collective understanding passed down through observation, memory, and communal experience rather than written ledgers or formal laws. The rhythm of exchange, the ebb and flow of gestures, glances, and offerings, becomes almost meditative once you start noticing it, revealing an economy built not on coercion or obligation, but on skillful negotiation, attention to detail, and mutual understanding. You realize, slowly, that participating in this system requires patience, humility, and attentiveness. Every trade is a lesson in perception, every smile a subtle cue, every refusal an opportunity to learn. Even frustration carries meaning, teaching you when to pause, when to offer more, when to defer to others' judgments. The beauty, and occasional exasperation, lies in learning the rhythm of this hidden economy, understanding its invisible rules, and discovering the ingenuity that allows a community to thrive without formalized structures. Here, survival, influence, and social cohesion are inseparable. Understanding the interplay of gestures, goods, and unspoken hierarchies becomes as important as the tools you carry or the materials you trade. Stepping ashore feels like plunging into another planet. The heat hits you first, sticky and unrelenting, settling into your clothes and clinging to your skin like a second layer. It's accompanied by a cacophony of unfamiliar sounds, the sharp calls of tropical birds, the incessant buzz of insects, and the distant, rhythmic crash of waves against jagged coral that seems both threatening and hypnotic. You take a cautious step forward, boots sinking slightly into warm, gritty sand. Realizing that being a sailor in Tahiti isn't just about trading nails, charms, or European goods, it's about surviving a social gauntlet that has its own intricate rules. The British crew fumbles awkwardly, wiping sweat from sunburned faces, adjusting hats that do little to shield the scorching sun, and struggling to remember which hand to offer in greeting, which hand to keep off a basket of coconuts, and when to speak versus remain silent. Hygiene is a constant, nagging concern. Salt water washes away the surface grime but nothing beneath, and lice seem to travel freely among men who haven't touched a comb in months. Some sailors scratch absent-mindedly, embarrassed, while others simply ignore the itching, focusing instead on the careful choreography of social interactions. Historians still debate whether European perceptions of Tahitian cleanliness were accurate or merely projections of British squeamishness and cultural anxiety. You trudge alongside your fellow sailors as they attempt to present themselves with dignity, a dignity that evaporates quickly when a curious crab pinches an unsuspecting toe or a local child, giggling, snatches a trinket from a pocket. There's a constant tension between politeness and survival, between curiosity and embarrassment, as you learn to gauge reactions, adjust posture, and choose words with care. One sailor, perhaps overestimating his charm, flings a handful of nails into a group of locals as if tossing candy at a parade, only to be met with a sharp but perfectly polite rebuke, a reminder that social capital here isn't measured in iron alone. Fringe accounts suggest some British men improvised small dances, songs, or theatrical gestures to endear themselves to local observers, while skeptics dismiss these as colorful exaggerations, meant more to entertain readers back in London than to reflect reality. The sensory overload continues unabated. Coconut husks crackle underfoot, the scent of roasting fish drifts from nearby fires, mingling with the salt tang of the sea, and the sun beats down with such intensity that sand particles shimmer in the air like drifting golden motes. Tahitians move with a fluid ease that seems effortless, barefoot, nimble, precise, each gesture loaded with subtle meaning. Even a simple nod or tilt of the head carries significance. One misstep on your part, a mispronounced word, a bow slightly too deep, or a hand held incorrectly, elicits nothing more than a slight lift of an eyebrow, yet you feel the lesson sink in. Patience, observation, and humility are as essential here as any tool you carry. Amid the confusion, moments of human universality pierce through. Laughter rises as a clumsy sailor attempts to balance a basket of coconuts on his head, only for it to tumble spectacularly, scattering fruit across the sand. A local woman shakes her head with a bemused smile, handing him a nail as if to reward effort rather than outcome. In these interactions, the mundane merges with the absurd, iron nails transform into symbols of respect, failure becomes fodder for amusement, and etiquette itself becomes a survival skill, as crucial as knowing which tide pools hide sharp coral. You begin to notice patterns, almost imperceptible at first, the way hands move during exchanges, the subtle tilt of a head signaling approval, the collective laughter that softens a misstep. Each encounter is a miniature lesson in timing, observation, and cultural literacy. Gradually, you realize that navigating Tahiti is not about conquest or domination, it's about attuning yourself to its rhythm, understanding its social currents, and moving within them with awareness. Sometimes, you will stumble, sometimes you will succeed, and occasionally, you will find yourself laughing at your own mistakes. In these rare moments, you glimpse the extraordinary hidden in the ordinary, that iron nails, a fallen basket, or a shared laugh are all threads in a vibrant tapestry that binds people, culture, and survival into a living, breathing whole. By the time you pause to catch your breath, sweat dripping from sunburned shoulders, you understand something crucial. Here, success depends not on strength alone, but on observation, respect, and the willingness to learn, even when everything about the new world feels overwhelming, bizarre, and just slightly dangerous. The land, the people, and even the smallest iron spikes demand attention, humility, and curiosity, and in returning these attentions, you begin to find your place, it's astonishing how much power a single nail can wield. You glance at your handful, each piece catching the tropical sun and gleaming with deceptive simplicity, and suddenly they feel like more than scraps of metal, they're badges of influence, tiny levers that shift social dynamics with almost magical efficiency. In Tahiti, a nail isn't merely a construction tool, it is a statement, a symbol, a bridge between intention and effect. Hand one over at the right moment, and a hut is repaired faster, a canoe balances more securely, or a flirtatious smile lingers a moment longer than it otherwise would. You begin to notice the subtleties, which nails go to whom, which trades serve purely practical purposes, and which carry hidden, almost ceremonial significance. Fringe accounts even hint that some British sailors became obsessed with cataloging the quality of nails, ranking them by shine, weight, or perceived rarity, much as a collector might sort rare stamps, though historians argue these anecdotes may lean more toward fanciful embellishment than strict fact. The use of nails as status symbols is remarkably sophisticated, far beyond what you might expect from objects so simple in form. A young woman accepting a single, shiny nail conveys careful appreciation, a refusal of an inferior piece signals discernment and taste. Men observe these transactions with keen attention, understanding that a well-timed or properly presented nail can elevate them subtly in communal esteem. You, as an outsider, are both amused and bewildered. A seemingly trivial metal spike has become a delicate gauge of respect, desirability, and cunning, a fulcrum upon which fleeting hierarchies pivot. Historians still debate whether this elevation of mundane objects was a short-lived curiosity, sparked by the novelty of European goods, or a deeper reflection on the universal human instinct to assign symbolic power to even the simplest items. Humor permeates these exchanges, often in unexpected ways. You watch a sailor proudly present his finest nail, only for a young woman to lift a finely arched eyebrow, hand him a carved coconut in return, and send him scuttling back to his pile of goods, cheeks flushed with mortification. Each trade feels like a game of delicate chess played with tangible pieces and invisible rules, where the moves are both deliberate and performative. It's ridiculous, yes, but in the absurdity lies a subtle truth: power and influence are never inherent in an object alone. They depend entirely on perception, timing, and the willingness of others to recognize, honor, or even play along with the implicit rules of the exchange. Meanwhile, the sensory world continues its relentless assault, pulling your attention in all directions. The sweet, earthy aroma of roasting taro mingles with the sharp tang of sea salt, waves crash rhythmically against coral outcrops, and the metallic glint of nails reflects sunlight in staccato bursts, echoing in rhythm with the lively chatter of trades. You catch glimpses of the fringe, whispered behaviors among your peers, sailors applying exotic oils or rubs to their nails in hopes of enhancing appeal, or treating them as talismans to charm a particularly discerning trader. These small superstitions and performative flourishes provoke laughter, a shared acknowledgement of how far humans will go to bend perception to their favor, yet, beneath the humor lies an undeniable, almost humbling truth: a small, sharp piece of iron has become a fulcrum, tilting relationships, shaping alliances, and perhaps nudging the currents of attraction and rivalry in subtle, invisible ways. Each exchange, no matter how seemingly trivial, reinforces the intricate lattice of social currency that governs life on the island. You realize that in this environment, survival is not just about possessing goods, it's about reading moments, discerning intentions, and understanding that even a humble nail can wield influence far beyond its material worth. In that glinting metal, there exists both absurdity and power, a constant reminder that value, like respect, is always a matter of context. The more time you spend on the island, the clearer it becomes that these exchanges are about far more than objects. They are about obligations, favors, and an intricate web of social contracts that bind the community in ways outsiders rarely perceive. You hand over a nail to a woman who repairs your hammock, and immediately, the air seems to shift. There's an unspoken expectation now, a favor returned at some future time, a smile acknowledged, perhaps a tidbit of information discreetly passed along to someone else. These obligations are subtle, almost imperceptible, yet their weight hangs in the air as tangibly as the tropical humidity that clings to your skin. Historians still debate how much of these interactions were shaped by coercion. How much by genuine consent, and how much by friendship or simple convenience. Standing amidst the busy rhythm of the village, you start realizing that the truth probably exists somewhere in the messy, fluid middle, neither entirely transactional nor entirely spontaneous. From the periphery, it becomes obvious that European sailors frequently misread these dynamics. Conditioned by the logic of linear transactions, goods in, payment out, they are ill-prepared for a system where a nail is rarely just a nail. Each one enters a cycle of mutual recognition and subtle reciprocity. A single exchange can ripple outward, influencing future negotiations, shaping social standing, or even nudging the delicate currents of romantic entanglement. Fringe reports tell of sailors frustrated to find that a favor they thought fully settled returned in unexpected forms, a knowing glance shared between friends, a dance performed in celebration at a festival, or a whispered story passed along to another trader. You begin to notice these nuances, recognizing that every act, however small, carries subtle signals, like notes in a complex musical composition that you are only just beginning to learn to hear. Charm and persuasion are as essential as the nails themselves. Deals are brokered not merely with objects but with personality, wit, and careful observation. You watch a young woman coax a reluctant sailor into parting with a nail, deploying smiles, laughter, and well-timed, pointed questions. The negotiation is deliberately playful, a mixture of artistry and strategy, and you realize that European notions of commerce, so rigid and matter-of-fact, barely scratch the surface of what is happening here. You attempt to replicate the technique yourself, but your gestures are too stiff, your tone too earnest, your lack of subtlety is immediately apparent. The locals, ever patient yet acutely observant, instruct by example, a tilt of the head, a carefully measured pause, a sly wink, gestures that convey far more than words ever could. Even when sailors stumble, these lessons underscore the sophistication of a social system that European eyes might dismiss as simple barter, yet which thrives on nuance, timing, and social intelligence. The sensory backdrop amplifies every interaction, intertwining the physical and social environment into one immersive experience. The sun warms your neck and shoulders, beads of sweat tracing paths down your spine, while the rich scent of roasting breadfruit drifts lazily across the gathering. Each metallic clink of nails against a palm punctuates conversation like the soft percussion in a complex musical ensemble, echoing off thatched roofs and coral-strewn shores. Even trivial moments, a nail catching the sunlight as it passes from one hand to another, seem imbued with significance, marking both the act and the intent behind it. You catch yourself smiling at the absurdity. A scrap of metal, mundane in your homeland, has become a key instrument in a dense network of trust, influence, and occasionally gentle manipulation. As the day stretches toward evening, the patterns become clearer. You start to appreciate the delicate balance between generosity and expectation, between obligation and freedom, between overt persuasion and subtle cunning. Each nail carries meaning far beyond its practical utility, and each exchange is a small testament to the fluid intelligence, social awareness, and human ingenuity that animates life on the island. In this small, nail-driven universe, survival and influence are intertwined, and even a simple act of handing over a piece of iron requires attentiveness, judgment, and, above all, respect for the invisible web that binds everyone together. The island's economy is no longer just about goods, it is a choreography of human relationships. As intricate and vital as the tides themselves, by now, the sensory world of Tahiti has fully engulfed you, wrapping around every sense like a vibrant, inescapable tapestry. The tang of salt hangs thick in the air, weaving itself into the rich aroma of roasting fish and the faint, cloying sweetness of ripe papayas left to ripen near sun-warmed huts. Occasionally, the sharp scent of crushed leaves or flowering shrubs cuts through, teasing your nostrils and reminding you that the land itself participates in this intricate economy. You trudge barefoot over sand that burns your soles, each step accompanied by the satisfying crunch of tiny shells and coral fragments, while the rhythmic clink of nails in your pocket resonates with a curious cadence. This sound, repetitive and tactile, is no longer just a background, almost hypnotic, it becomes a kind of internal metronome, marking each moment of observation, negotiation, and decision. Fringe accounts whisper of sailors who tried perfuming their nails, coating the iron in oils or spices to make them more attractive, though skeptics argue this may have been embellishment, or perhaps early attempts at marketing genius. Whatever the truth, the idea of deliberately enhancing such a humble object strikes you as both ridiculous and cunning. The clamor of trade itself is mesmerizing, like a living symphony composed of gestures, glances, and the subtle shift of weight as participants lean into a deal. Tahitian women orchestrate these exchanges with a precision that seems effortless, like conductors guiding an invisible orchestra. You start noticing patterns that were invisible at first, the flick of a wrist to indicate willingness, the slight tilt of the head to signal hesitation, the deliberate pause in speech that punctuates intention. Every movement carries weight, every silence speaks volumes. British sailors attempt to replicate these gestures, often failing spectacularly, yet on rare occasions they hit the mark perfectly. Earning laughter, nods of approval, or even a fleeting smile that feels almost like permission to participate. Historians continue to debate whether these gestures were universally understood or if each village maintained its own delicate code, a reminder that human communication, even within trade, is never purely verbal, and meaning is always negotiated in context. As nightfall descends, another layer of complexity emerges. The warm sand cools underfoot, softening the impact of each step, while long shadows stretch across the beach, distorting movements and creating pockets of intimacy within the broader bustle. Deals struck in the heat of the day are revisited, refined, or gently renegotiated. And the dimming light encourages subtler tactics. Tahitians lean closer, whisper half-formed suggestions, or offer a small favor in advance of a promised nail. The interplay of light, motion, and social expectation forms a rhythm almost musical in its precision, a rhythm you, as an outsider, struggle to anticipate yet cannot stop watching. Each exchange feels theatrical, like a carefully choreographed dance in which you are both participant and audience, awed by the grace and ingenuity on display. Meanwhile, your body protests with quiet insistence. Sunburn stings your shoulders and neck, soles blister from sand and coral, and muscles scream from the constant bending, lifting, and squatting required to participate and observe. Sores begin to scab over, small abrasions from overzealous work or misjudged footing reminding you that your presence in this system carries a physical toll. Yet your mind remains electrified, drawn into the patterns, rhythms, and subtle signals of a society that turns the mundane, iron nails, baskets, coconuts, into currency for influence, status, and even fleeting affection. You begin discerning which nails hold the greatest sway, the carefully selected, shiny specimens passed at just the right moment. Sparking smiles, grudging admiration, or polite deference, the absurdity of it all strikes you again and again. Tiny bits of metal, mundane at home, dictate respect, unlock favors, and sway human emotion here. It is simultaneously ridiculous, baffling, and completely undeniable. As the sun dips toward the horizon and the heat softens, you lie on the cooling sand, damp with sweat and flecks of soil, nails still clinking softly in your pocket. The sensory immersion, the taste of salt on your lips, the tang of smoke and roasted breadfruit, the warm texture of sand beneath your back, the symphony of gestures and whispers around you, has transformed what was once ordinary into something almost magical. Trade, observation, and subtle human cunning have revealed themselves not merely as acts of survival but as art, a delicate ballet in which you are learning, clumsily but eagerly, to participate. In that moment, the island economy no longer feels foreign. It is alive, intricate, and vibrant, built on the interplay of senses, social intelligence, and meaningful objects, like nails, whose importance lies not in material utility alone but in the invisible threads that connect everyone who touches them. Every step, every clink of metal, every exchanged glance adds another note to the complex melody of life here, and you realize that to survive and thrive, you must not only watch, but listen, feel, and, when possible, smile. Cultural misunderstandings are everywhere, and you quickly realize that surviving here isn't just about knowing where to step or how to balance a basket, it's about deciphering an entire, living system of subtle social cues. One moment, a bright smile from a local woman seems to signal approval, the next you discover it carries more amusement than agreement, a private joke shared between participants whose eyes have long learned to read each other. You fumble, offering a nail at the wrong moment, and receive a gentle, almost teasing correction, a tilt of the head, a soft laugh, a hand gesturing the proper timing. The lesson is never harsh, but its precision is clear. In this world, patience and observation matter more than brute force or quick gestures. You trudge along, noting how body language, tone, and timing convey as much as the objects themselves. Fringe reports whisper of sailors who accidentally insulted entire groups by offering a nail with the wrong hand or at the wrong moment, yet historians debate the veracity of these tales. Perhaps they were exaggerations in travel journals, little flourishes to spice up otherwise mundane logs. But the possibility feels entirely plausible. The humor here is subtle, constant, and deeply human, if you have the patience to notice it. You watch a sailor bow clumsily to a local woman, stumbling over her name with his awkward accent. She tilts her head slightly, and the expression is unreadable at first: amusement, exasperation, polite warning, but the ambiguity itself is the lesson. You can't help but chuckle quietly at the absurdity, imagining how the same gesture might be interpreted back in London as a grand act of diplomacy, an official performance worthy of commendation. Meanwhile, the women coordinate among themselves with effortless precision, exchanging signals through quick glances, slight nods, and even the subtle placement of trade items: a coconut, a woven mat, a small nail, each arranged to communicate priority, expectation, or subtle critique. Over time, you begin to see that these misunderstandings aren't just accidents, they're intentional instruments of education, teaching patience, observation, and humility through gentle, almost playful guidance. Even the smallest gestures carry immense weight. A nod, a casual tilt, a hand resting lightly on a basket, or the way a nail is extended across a palm can convey appreciation, quiet critique, or a polite request for reconsideration. You mimic motions, carefully studying the rhythm, yet timing proves elusive. A nail offered at precisely the wrong instant, meant as a compliment, can read as presumptuous. No scolding follows, instead, the locals guide subtly, showing you the cadence of interaction through repeated correction, slight adjustments, and silent example. Each misstep becomes a learning moment, a reminder that awareness and attentiveness are as essential as any object you carry. Historians continue to debate whether most British sailors ever truly mastered these systems, or if the majority of blunders were simply brushed off with gentle laughter and amusement. But from your perspective, every lesson is lived in real time, tangible and immediate. The absurdity of it all often reveals itself through the senses. The scent of roasted taro mingles with salt air and sun-warmed vegetation, clashing and harmonizing in a way that is at once distracting and essential. The glittering reflection of sunlight on water punctuates each exchange, a visual reminder that everything exists within a context beyond the immediate transaction. Even the clatter of nails, each tiny, metallic note, seems to echo the rhythm of negotiation itself, punctuating conversation and puncturing moments of tension or hesitation. You laugh quietly at your own mistakes, partly at embarrassment, partly at the sheer ridiculousness of how seriously everyone takes these tiny iron rods. Missteps, corrections, mimicry, and subtle observation create a continuous, almost hypnotic loop of learning, amusement, and cultural insight. By the end of the day, you feel exhausted yet invigorated, aware that your senses are both instruments and teachers. Every glance, gesture, and nail carries meaning beyond the obvious, revealing that survival in this world demands awareness as much as stamina or cleverness. The island, the market, the people, and the seemingly mundane nails together form a vast, interconnected system that is playful, rigorous, and endlessly instructive. You lie in your hammock later, fingers tracing a single iron spike, contemplating how such a small object can embody lessons in patience, humility, and human connection, all while simultaneously providing a source of absurd delight. Night drapes over the island like a soft, encompassing blanket, muting the harsh glare of the sun and transforming familiar shapes into shadowed silhouettes. Suddenly, everything feels more intimate, more charged with possibility, as if the darkness itself heightens the stakes of every glance and gesture. You trudge along the sand under a thin crescent moon, aware that the rhythm of deals and negotiations doesn't pause just because daylight has fled. On the contrary, some argue that the cover of night enhances the subtlety and complexity of trade. Shadows stretch and twist across the sand, exaggerating movements, and body language emerges as the primary, almost sacred form of communication. You watch Tahitian women orchestrating exchanges with quiet laughter, careful dance steps, or whispered words, and it dawns on you that these nocturnal negotiations are a performance, an intricate choreography where every tilt of the head, every fleeting glance, and every subtle pause carries unspoken weight. Historians continue to debate whether these nighttime interactions were a deliberate tactic designed to amplify social leverage or merely the natural extension of day-long customs into evening hours. The British sailors, predictably, stumble through this delicate process. You see a man attempting to imitate a local dance, swaying awkwardly while presenting a nail in his clammy, sweaty palm, only to be met with a polite, knowing giggle that betrays both amusement and subtle correction. The scene is almost comical to witness, yet every misstep carries a lesson. Timing, elegance, and perception matter as much as the physical object being exchanged. Meanwhile, the women coordinate among themselves with a finesse that seems effortless, guiding each negotiation with tiny adjustments, a flick of the wrist, a subtle shift of posture, a sidelong glance, allowing the entire system to operate seamlessly. Slowly, it becomes clear that charm, poise, and timing are as critical as the nails you carry. Fringe accounts even hint at sailors attempting theatrical flourishes. Soft singing, juggling small items, or inventing brief, symbolic rituals, to curry favor, though skeptics rightly caution that many such reports may be embellished, a reflection of travel writers' desire for color rather than fact. The nighttime atmosphere is thick with sensory input, and each detail affects perception, shaping the subtle alchemy of trade. Warm sand presses against bare feet, cooling unevenly as the tide laps closer to the shore. The sea murmurs rhythmically, a steady, hypnotic undertone to the faint crackle of palm fronds stirred by a gentle breeze. You notice the way light plays across surfaces, a glint of moonlight on a well-polished nail, shadows falling across a woven mat in a pattern that seems intentional, the scent of roasted breadfruit drifting just enough to stimulate appetite without distraction. Every sense seems heightened, each detail carrying more weight in guiding decisions and impressions. Your own awareness sharpens, tuned to every flicker of expression, every whispered syllable, and every micro-gesture that could signal approval, doubt, or expectation. There's a quiet, profound lesson embedded in this sensory tapestry. Trade is never merely about goods, it's about trust, subtle influence, and the ability to read invisible currents of expectation and emotion. A nail handed too early, too late, or with the wrong posture can sour a relationship. A gesture perfectly timed, a tilt of the head, a small nod, a whispered word, can cultivate smiles, favors, or influence that endures for weeks. You notice how even minor adjustments in behavior ripple outward, a subtle shift in weight, a controlled pause, the barely audible laugh at a well-timed joke. Each detail reinforces the idea that power lies not in the object alone, but in the perception, context, and social intelligence that surrounds it. As you trudge back toward the ship, the wet sand reflecting moonlight like liquid silver, you carry more than iron nails in your pockets. You carry insights into the rhythm of negotiation, the delicacy of cultural perception, and the strange, almost magical alchemy by which even the smallest objects, simple spikes of metal, can command attention, respect, and influence. The night has revealed a lesson beyond barter. In this world, observation, subtlety, and attentiveness are as valuable as any currency, and the mastery of these invisible threads is what separates the clumsy outsider from the participant in the intricate, living dance of Tahitian commerce. As the days pass, the toll of island life on the sailors becomes impossible to ignore. You trudge past men scratching at scabs, rubbing sore muscles, and grimacing under the relentless sun that seems to press against skin and bones alike. The heat is unyielding, penetrating even through the layers of sweat-soaked clothing, leaving skin raw and sensitive. Scurvy looms like a silent predator, its effects visible in swollen gums, pallid complexions, and lethargic movements that sap both efficiency and morale. Lice infest hair and beards, creating a near-constant itch that no amount of scratching can fully relieve. Even the simplest chores, cooking over open fires, cleaning the deck, or handling the ever-present iron nails, become exercises in endurance and focus. Slowly, painfully, you begin to appreciate that survival on this island depends not just on strength or courage, but on a finely tuned combination of physical resilience, mental fortitude, and adaptability. Historians continue to debate whether European medical practices, from applying lime juice to rudimentary herbal remedies, were genuinely effective in preventing disease or merely placebo rituals offering sailors a fragile sense of control amidst chaos. Meanwhile, the Tahitians demonstrate a remarkable familiarity with natural remedies, a practical wisdom honed over generations. Crushed leaves, aromatic herbs, and coconut oil are applied to soothe wounds, repel insects, and maintain hygiene in ways that seem both elegant and intuitive. You walk among them, sometimes observing from a careful distance, sometimes engaging directly in their techniques, and gradually realize that true survival isn't rooted solely in tools or European know-how, it's in observation, learning, and humility. Fringe reports suggest that some sailors, witnessing these remedies, imbued them with mystical properties, imagining that the very touch of a local healer's hands could ward off disease, though modern scholars tend to attribute such beliefs to a blend of superstition, gratitude, and psychological comfort. Trade continues alongside these health struggles, often subtly shaped by the sailor's physical condition. A man with a raw, oozing sore on his hand might be quietly passed over in barter, his compromised health signaling weakness or unreliability. Conversely, a quick recovery, clever display of endurance, or even a carefully timed grin can earn favor and renewed respect. You notice that the body itself becomes part of the negotiation landscape: posture, strength, visible injuries, and even personal hygiene all communicate messages that influence outcomes. There's an almost theatrical quality in watching men stumble, falter, and recover, their social standing rising or falling according to invisible metrics of resilience, charm, and composure. The sensory experience of island life remains relentless and inescapable. The mixed aroma of sweat, salt water, and roasted fish clings to the air, while the sun radiates heat that bakes into the sand and makes each barefoot step an ordeal. Nails clink softly in pockets, punctuating each interaction with a metallic rhythm, a reminder that commerce and survival are intertwined. You find yourself hyper-aware of every movement, every touch, every inhalation of salt-tinged breeze. Even minor victories, a successful trade, a nod of approval, a fleeting smile, bring moments of flush relief and quiet amusement, tiny rewards that punctuate a day otherwise defined by toil. In this environment, every nail, every gesture, every moment of observation becomes more than a mere tool or token of trade. It is a mechanism for endurance, a test of social acuity, and a subtle instrument for negotiating existence itself. Survival, negotiation, and influence are inseparable, each action layered with consequence, each interaction weighted by unspoken rules. And beneath the grueling labor, the sunburned skin, the aches, and the persistent discomfort, there exists a faint, lingering hope, a hope that, through attentiveness, patience, and cunning, you might emerge from this strange, nail-driven world slightly wiser, more capable, and perhaps even a little more human than when you first set foot on these shores. By now, tattoos seem to dominate both the visual and social landscape, saturating the island with a language of inked meaning. You trudge past men and women whose bodies are living canvases, the patterns curling around limbs, torsos, and shoulders in intricate, looping swirls that seem almost alive in the sunlight. Initially, it feels like simple decoration, a flourish of artistry to mark oneself in a bright, tropical world. Yet as you linger, observe, and tentatively participate in exchanges, it becomes clear that these markings are far more than ornamental. They are codified messages, visual statements of status, identity, and subtle social signals. A tattooed arm might identify someone as a skilled trader, trusted with certain goods, while a pattern across a back or chest could silently indicate alliances, family ties, or romantic availability. Historians continue to debate the primary function of these designs. Were they primarily personal expressions? Or did they operate as a kind of informal ledger, recording obligations, debts, and favors within the barter economy? Perhaps they were both simultaneously, a fusion of art and practicality. As a European observer, you are simultaneously fascinated, bewildered, and slightly overwhelmed. One sailor whispers urgently about the mystical meanings he believes he has uncovered, speaking as though decoding a secret language written in flesh. Another, attempting to capture what he sees in a journal, produces something that resembles a tangle of spaghetti more than the precise curves and geometric motifs adorning the bodies around him. Fringe accounts speculate that some tattoos might have functioned as secret codes for trade, tiny symbols indicating who owed what, who could be trusted, or which goods were available, but such claims remain heavily debated, skeptics dismissing them as fanciful storytelling, the imaginings of bored, homesick sailors searching for intrigue in otherwise repetitive days. As you trudge along the sandy shore, your attention is constantly drawn to the interplay between tattoos and social behavior. A flick of a wrist, an arm raised in negotiation, or the subtle shift of a shoulder can reveal a previously hidden mark, prompting recognition, respect, or amusement among peers. You begin to notice how even small movements are choreographed to highlight or conceal these designs, a quiet dance of visibility and discretion. The markings themselves influence perception. The curve of a tattooed line can enhance credibility, signal skill, or provide a form of social leverage. Gradually, you understand that here, the body itself functions as a communicative tool, a living ledger that carries as much weight in negotiation, barter, and flirtation as any iron nail tucked in a pocket or small object exchanged between hands. The sensory environment complements this intricate social choreography. Salt from the sea mixes with sweat on sun-baked skin, the smell tangy and sharp. The sun glints off glossy ink, drawing the eye at exactly the right moment, turning the body into a dynamic signal visible even from across the market or shoreline. You observe sailors adjusting posture, gestures, and even tone of voice to match visual cues they are only beginning to understand, fumbling at times, succeeding at others. Humor threads itself throughout these interactions. A man attempts to mimic a gesture that inadvertently reveals a tattooed pattern, eliciting a burst of laughter from locals. Another misreads a design entirely, creating a moment of awkward comedy that softens the otherwise tense rhythm of trade. By the end of the day, it becomes evident that tattoos are far more than decoration. They are subtle, living instruments of communication, negotiation, and storytelling, merging artistry with utility in ways you had never imagined possible. Each mark carries multiple layers of meaning, personal, social, economic, and sometimes even playful. To navigate this world successfully, you must not only carry nails, observe trades, and measure gestures, but also read the living codes etched into the skin of those around you. In this convergence of body, art, and commerce, you witness a society in which every visual detail contributes to the intricate, pulsating rhythm of island life, and where survival is as much about understanding the language of ink as it is about mastering the exchange of goods. Eventually, the time comes for the British sailors to leave, and you trudge toward the ships with a mixture of relief and melancholy, each step heavy with the knowledge that the island, its people, and its strange, nail-driven economy will recede behind you. The air carries the familiar tang of salt. Sharp and bracing, the waves murmur rhythmically against the hull, and the soft chatter, laughter, and occasional scolding of the island gradually fade into memory. Every detail of the day, the gleam of a perfectly polished nail, the sway of palms in the breeze, the tilt of a woman's head as she evaluated an offering, presses itself into your mind, layering onto the sensory and social tapestry you have painstakingly observed. Sailors' journals, diaries, and letters begin to accumulate, documenting events, trades, and impressions, but almost immediately, the boundary between memory and embellishment becomes porous. Tales emerge that are part recollection, part invention, and part longing, nails that supposedly fixed entire villages overnight, favors that led to whirlwind romances, and moonlit negotiations so delicate they could rival any courtly intrigue in a European palace. Fringe accounts escalate even further, describing perfumed nails, enchanted mats, or even bewitched coconuts, though historians caution that these accounts may reveal more about the imaginations of exotic weary sailors than the reality of Tahitian life. Back on the ship, the social dynamics among your own crew come into sharp focus. Tales are swapped in the communal quarters, reputations debated over meals of hardtack and salted meat, and events recounted with dramatic flair, each sailor eager to cement his version of truth. Each man exaggerates his own cleverness, downplays mistakes, and occasionally claims credit for exchanges that were, in fact, orchestrated by someone else. You observe how these narratives solidify with astonishing speed. A simple trade of a nail for a favor becomes a legendary tale, often with added complications, rivalries, or improbable twists. It's a natural process. Humans are story-driven, and novelty and danger combine to make even mundane transactions into compelling anecdotes. You trudge along the deck, noticing how these narratives take on a life of their own, shaping the perception of Tahiti in the minds of Europeans long after the ships have vanished from view. Historians still debate which accounts bear the closest resemblance to reality, as discrepancies, contradictions, and creative liberties abound across different logs, letters, and memoirs. Even the mundane details become magnified in hindsight, acquiring color and rhythm that they rarely held in the moment. You chuckle at the recollections of awkward bows, mispronounced names, and accidental slights, realizing that humor, sometimes sharp, occasionally tender, is a central thread woven through memory. Some sailors insist that certain nails magically influenced relationships, while others shrug and argue that luck, timing, and cultural misunderstanding were enough to explain any perceived effect. You begin to recognize a pattern: fatigue, novelty, and the strangeness of the environment combine to produce fertile ground for exaggeration, creating a storytelling ecosystem where small events flourish into legend, and every trivial exchange becomes a potential moral, joke, or cautionary tale. The journey home offers ample time for reflection. As the ship cuts through the waves, every nail, gesture, and favor exchanged on Tahiti begins to resonate in your mind, accumulating into a complex mosaic of impressions, insights, and amusements. You trudge across the deck, the wood creaking beneath your feet, feeling the weight not only of the objects in your pocket but of the stories ready to be told, aware that memory has already begun to reshape reality. Reality and recollection blur, folding into one another, and myths are born as easily as facts. What endures are small truths wrapped in layers of humor, exaggeration, and fascination, a tilt of the head that expressed subtle judgment. The glint of a nail passed at the perfect moment, the delicate choreography of barter and favor. And you realize that human experience is never purely objective. Every interaction, every exchange, every sensory detail becomes part lived, part imagined, a narrative that will echo like the metallic clink of nails long after the moment itself has passed. Even as the horizon swallows the first glimpses of the island, the stories linger. You know that when you return home, when the journals are opened and letters are read, these small truths, tiny shards of experience, will mingle with embellishment, humor, and speculation, becoming the version of Tahiti that exists in the minds of those who never set foot on its sands. And perhaps that is the ultimate power of these exchanges, these fleeting, nail-driven interactions. They survive beyond the physical, carried forward in memory, in narrative, and in the unending human desire to make meaning, to connect, and to marvel at the strange, intricate rhythms of a world once lived. As you pore over the accounts left behind, it becomes clear that timelines are a tangled mess. Logs contradict one another, diaries exaggerate, and the dates of key trades are often uncertain. You trudge through piles of parchment, trying to reconcile one sailor's recollection with another's, only to find yourself deeper in the fog of conflicting stories. Some claim a specific barter happened on a particular day, while others insist it took place weeks later, or even in a different bay entirely. Historians still argue over these inconsistencies, debating which sources can be trusted and which are more reflective of personal ego, memory lapses, or creative storytelling. The absurdity of it all is part of the charm. A supposedly trivial exchange, a nail for a shell necklace, appears in 3 different logs with wildly varying embellishments. In one, the trade sparks a dance; in another, it leads to an elaborate prank; in a third, it supposedly influences the social ranking of the village for months. You chuckle quietly, recognizing the human tendency to dramatize even the smallest victories. Fringe scholars suggest some entries were deliberately altered to amuse back home or to enhance the reputation of the sailor recording them, though mainstream historians argue that much of the distortion is accidental, a natural consequence of memory and fatigue. The complexity of timelines mirrors the subtlety of social negotiation. You notice that small misremembered details can radically shift interpretation. A nail handed over at the wrong moment could be portrayed as a monumental gift or a comic blunder, depending on the writer. You trudge through each narrative carefully, appreciating the layers of humor, tension, and human ambition embedded within. Even mundane sensory details, the smell of roasting fish, the clink of iron, the warmth of sun-warmed sand, are often embroidered to create a more vivid account, adding to the difficulty of discerning fact from flair. By the end of your review, you start to sense a pattern amid the chaos. Despite the conflicting dates and embellished anecdotes, certain truths emerge. Nails mattered, exchanges were intricate, and human observation and adaptability shaped outcomes as much as any object. You realize that history isn't just about recording events accurately, it's about interpreting the interactions, misunderstandings, and absurdities that reveal how people lived, laughed, and bargained. The tangled timelines, far from frustrating, offer insight into both the European perspective and the Tahitian social fabric, showing how memory and myth intertwine to create enduring stories. As the months pass and the initial novelty of nails fades, you begin noticing subtle, long-term effects on Tahitian society. You trudge through villages where ordinary objects have gained unexpected symbolic weight, and where social hierarchies shift ever so slightly in response to European influence. A woman who once relied on shell or wood now wields an iron nail with measured intent. A man's reputation grows after deftly negotiating a trade that seemed trivial at the moment. Historians still debate whether these changes constituted a lasting cultural transformation or were simply temporary ripples in a largely self-sufficient society. The legacy of these exchanges isn't always serious. Humor, gossip, and performance become intertwined with social memory. You overhear villagers joking about the sailors' obsession with nails, recounting exaggerated tales of perfumed iron or moonlit negotiations with a wink. These stories evolve over time, blending fact with entertainment. Fringe accounts claim that some nails even came to be seen as charms or talismans, though the evidence is mostly anecdotal. The point is clear: even something as mundane as a metal spike can leave an imprint on culture, especially when mixed with human creativity, ambition, and a touch of absurdity. You also notice shifts in gender roles and social games. Women's strategic use of favors, trade, and subtle influence becomes more pronounced. Partly because European sailors inadvertently elevated the visibility of these skills. At the same time, men adjust to new expectations, learning that material gifts and small gestures can carry as much weight as brute strength or authority. The rhythm of daily life subtly changes, guided by lessons in negotiation, observation, and mutual understanding. You trudge through these insights with quiet amazement, realizing that culture is constantly evolving, often in response to interactions so small they might seem insignificant from a distance. As you observe, you recognize that myth and memory preserve these moments with a kind of human poetry. Nails clinked, favors exchanged, and laughter shared under tropical stars. all combine into a tapestry that reflects both human absurdity and ingenuity. What survives is neither wholly fact nor fiction, but a delicate mix, the legacy of curiosity, humor, and adaptability in a world reshaped by tiny objects, gentle manipulation, and the universal desire to connect. Even decades later, the stories retain their resonance, proof that small things, handled wisely, can ripple far beyond their apparent value. By the time your visit recedes into memory, the bizarre, tiny, human moments linger like shells clinging to your feet after a long walk on the beach. You trudge through recollections of clumsy bows, mispronounced names, and the occasional accidental insult, and yet, each awkward encounter contains a kernel of insight. Small nails clinking in palms, whispered favors exchanged under the sun or moon, and gestures layered with meaning become part of a gentle rhythm you can almost feel in your chest. Fringe tales of perfumed iron or enchanted coconuts may have been exaggerated, but the laughter, embarrassment, and curiosity they inspired were undeniably real. Historians still debate how much of this mattered in the grand scheme of cultural exchange. Yet for you, immersed in the experience, the significance is immediate and visceral. You notice patterns emerging, subtle but telling. Humor threaded through every negotiation, charm employed as currency alongside material goods, and observation as a survival skill, all reveal that human adaptability is as much a driver of history as conquest or trade. The sensory world of Tahiti, the warmth of the sun, the scent of roasted breadfruit, the clink of nails, continues to color your memories, reminding you that experience is not just intellectual but bodily and emotional. Even minor blunders, the wrong tilt of a head, a poorly timed smile, become sources of reflection, teaching lessons in humility, patience, and attentiveness that you carry far beyond the island. By now, you understand that the absurdity of the situation is precisely what makes it memorable. Everyday objects acquire outsized meaning, social dynamics play out like a carefully choreographed dance, and the smallest acts, offering a nail, returning a favor, sharing a joke, have consequences that ripple through time. You trudge through these realizations gently, noting how humor, attention, and human ingenuity transform even the most mundane moments into enduring stories. And as you let your mind settle, it becomes clear that these narratives are more than curiosities, they are gentle reminders of our shared humanity, the absurdity and grace intertwined in every interaction. As you drift toward the edge of memory, the tempo slows. The relentless sun softens into a warm glow, the waves murmur with a gentle rhythm, and the clink of nails in your pocket fades into a distant, comforting echo. You trudge through recollections of tropical scents, the tactile grit of sand between your toes, the playful glances exchanged across trading mats. Everything softens, the tension, the confusion, even the occasional embarrassment of clumsy gestures or misinterpreted smiles. You realize that these experiences, so vivid and chaotic in the moment, now settle into a quiet rhythm, like the gentle rise and fall of the tide. There's a tenderness in remembering the absurdity, the humor, and the small acts of ingenuity. You think of the tiny iron nails that seemed so trivial yet became instruments of influence and social connection. You recall whispered favors, subtle negotiations, and the artistry of body language, the delicate interplay of gestures and glances that conveyed more than words ever could. Even mistakes and misunderstandings now feel like lessons whispered softly through time. A reminder that human life is rich with nuance and surprise, even in the most ordinary exchanges. As you let these images drift through your mind, your body unwinds. The heat, the sweat, the clumsy awkwardness, all fade into gentle warmth, a soothing backdrop for contemplation. You realize that the story isn't just about trade, nails, or island life, it's about attention, curiosity, and the small ways humans connect, learn, and adapt. The humor lingers in your chest like a soft chuckle in the dark, the absurdity becomes a lullaby, and even the tiniest iron spike carries a whisper of history's gentle rhythm. Allow your thoughts to float, untethered, and feel the calm of the world as it softens around you. The exotic chaos, the tiny dramas, and the intricate social dances fade into a quiet understanding. Life, in all its detail, is as absurd as it is beautiful. Drift with it, breathe with it, and let the gentle pulse of human absurdity carry you into sleep.